Hello, and welcome to Solidari-Tea, the Resource Center's podcast at UCSC. The purpose of Solidari-Tea is to uplift the voices and actions of students who work at the Resource Center or with student organizations. I'm Mark. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an intern with the ERC who will be hosting today's podcast. Yuya, who is in the background, is the other ERC intern who helps with video editing and much needed tech support. Please note that the opinions and views expressed in today's episodes are of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UCSC Resource Centers. Okay, so going into a little bit of background for today's episode. So originally, this topic was influenced because I sat in y'all's talk or some of y'all's talk at the 3C's conference. I will get into what the C's mean later. And it really inspired me, especially as a fourth year finishing my last quarter, knowing what to really expect going, or not really knowing what to expect going into like the workforce and like ways to navigate it. But anyways, let me go into my little pre-written spiel. So originally titled the Multicultural Conference and then the Communities of Colors Career Series, this year's 3C's, the C standing Courageous Career Conversations event, brought back many familiar faces of folks who worked with the RCs or with other student orgs on campus to discuss their experiences from the process of securing their current jobs, and also sharing their experiences with navigating different corporate/work structures. And Shreya, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Shreya. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently working at the UCSC Career Success Office as an event and marketing intern. I helped market and event the Courageous Career Conversations, or 3C event in February, and I'll be helping Mark co-host this episode today as we continue the 3C conversation.
Very cool. And whoever wants to go first, we can go from the list down. If they would like to introduce themselves, their pronouns, where they worked when they were a slug, and what they are currently doing now.
Hi, everyone. My name's Angie Yang. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a former intern at APERC as well as the Women's Center and from UCSC class of 2021, where I studied politics and feminist studies. And currently I'm working on the social impact team at Electronic Arts, supporting our philanthropic portfolio.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Mancia. I use she, her, ea pronouns, and I am a former Women's Center intern, class of 2020, and I studied sociology and American Latinx studies. I currently serve as a program manager at a local nonprofit in Santa Cruz known as the Health Improvement Partnership of Santa Cruz County.
Hi, everyone. My name is Srija. My pronouns are she, her, hers. At my time at UCSC, I was a APERC lead with the Asian American Pacific Islander Resource Center. I was graduating class of 2020, and I studied intensive psychology and cognitive science with a concentration in artificial intelligence. I'm currently working as a UX researcher in the tech industry.
So what inspired you to follow your specific career path? Was it a class you took or a specific lived experience? Angie, would you also like to start off for this one?
Sure, I can get started with this one. Not a specific class or lived experience. I actually started off at UCSC studying human bio, and I bopped around, ended up at the major that I chose. I think very similar to how most college students approach finding a job, I sent my resume absolutely everywhere. I sent it to places within the States, places abroad. I sent it to tech companies, to nonprofits, anything that sounded remotely interesting and that I could potentially do 40% of the job description, I sent it there. And throughout my internships and then also coming upon graduating, I really just sat with the interviews that I did get and the acceptances that I did get from this list of opportunities, what sounds the coolest? And I just kind of went by that. It was a complete gut feeling the entire way through. And I wish there was more rhyme or reason or strategy to what I did. But I think I was just really working off of like anxiety of graduating and seeing what I could land.
As far as finding this field, I was actually, it's interesting. I've reflected a lot on the path that I took to get to this point and the people who helped me get here. And a lot of it I actually find was like a lot of AAPI women who were willing to like lend a helping hand and help me find my path. The very first of which was Layla Takayama, professor at UCSC. Dr. Takayama is currently a professor as well, and during some of her classes, she mentioned her experiences as a researcher in the UX field, which got me interested and introduced me to the field to begin with. From there, I was able to talk to a former APER grad student who currently works at the company where I work, and talking to her and getting some hints from her as to how to move forward, as well as connecting with peers my own age that she recommended me talking to, that she had known from mentoring them as well. It was honestly a lot of women supporting women, of them uplifting me, giving me advice as to how to move forward. And I'm really appreciative of being able to have had experiences with the support that I've had.
Yeah, I think this one is an interesting one because I always felt like I had to pick a certain path. You know, growing up, I was always like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? Or, you know, when you speak to people about what you're studying, it's like, well, what do you want to do with that? How are you going to apply that? And for me, I had initially came into my time at UC Santa Cruz wanting to be a math teacher. And shortly after starting, I realized that that wasn't necessarily my dream. That was just like myself trying to mold myself into a specific path. Where I am at currently, in the public health sector, I did a lot of reflecting as to how I got to this place, and I think my family has a lot of bounds in health. Many of my family members work in health adjacent fields, and so I definitely feel like, you know, I drew some inspiration from them. But how I got to my role is that I actually began at my job as an intern, and I scaled my way up. I actually was fortunate enough to meet my boss and many of my colleagues at a conference, and the rest is history. But it has really pushed me and inspired me to continue my studies and pursue a master's of public health, which is something that I will be pursuing later on this year.
Very exciting. Thank you all so much for sharing. And Shreya, would you like to introduce that second question?
Okay, next question. What are some tips that you all have for our listeners who are starting their job search and might be unsure of what lies ahead? This kind of repeats the question we asked at our 3C event, which was, what do you wish you had known when you first started your job search? Angie, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I can start. I think similarly to what Amy said for the previous question is don't put so much pressure onto it. You don't have to find the one correct path for life right now. You don't even have to be working towards whatever that path is, but definitely whatever job you choose, make sure it sits well with your morals. I think that's definitely like a privileged mindset to be able to have, right? Sometimes you just got to get money. You got to get paid to eat and have a roof over your head. But I think in the position I'm in now, I definitely understand what my morals are. I try not to have my work override it, and also create those strong boundaries within work. And ultimately, if your environment isn't meshing with you, there's no shame in leaving. If the current path you're on or the path that you choose isn't meshing with how you see your ideal self, there's no shame in leaving and picking something else up.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Angie, and that's one of like my biggest tips is be patient, and don't mold yourself into anyone else's expectations or an expectation of an employer is if it feels like your values and your expectations are simply not matching. Like there are a lot of opportunities out there, and if an employer really wants to work with you, then they'll be willing to compromise and work with what you would like to do as well. Um, and I feel like the process between like leaving the university and finding a job, especially if you don't have anything lined up, it can be very nerve wracking. It can be very thought provoking. You can spiral into feeling anxious and feeling like, crap, what am I going to do next? Especially if you have life keeps going on in the background. You might have rent due at the end of the month, and you're thinking about like, well, how am I going to make ends meet? And I think where there is a will, there is definitely a way. And so I would just say be patient, and even if there is a job that you start and your values and ethics aren't necessarily aligning, then do not hesitate to just choose to look for a new placement. That is completely okay. I have plenty of friends who I chat with and have like shorter tenures at their jobs, and they often think about, well, how is this going to look like for the next recruiter, someone who looks at my resume, and there's definitely always time to justify and speak to folks as to why your journey went the way that it did, and that shouldn't be something to worry about. So definitely, patience is something that is key.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think patience is a really important part of job hunting. Of course, it's super frustrating and like it's really discouraging. I think it's almost intended to be that way. A lot of times I mean like I think there's like the age old problem of like, oh, I need a job to get experience, but I need experience to get a job. And it's just really frustrating, right? It could be really disheartening. And something that I heard early on in my career search that really helped me was that like you only need one, right? Like I know it sounds like a lot, right? And you're applying to hundreds or thousands of jobs even, like it's crazy right now, right? Of course, like it's so hard to find something, and you feel like you're putting in all your effort and sending cover letters and reaching out to people on LinkedIn. It's so stressful, right? But you don't need 10 jobs. Like you just need one, right? So even if 9 of them don't say yes, or if 899 of them don't say yes, it's okay, because you like once you get the first job or something, once you kind of break that threshold and you're getting closer to the kind of path that you want to take, every job after that becomes so much easier to get and to do, right? Because once you've kind of proven, and I know it sucks that you have to like prove yourself in that way, but once you've kind of shown that you are a hireable quote unquote person, you're able to get the next opportunity much easier. So I know it's tough and it's really stressful, and I wish I could say that it's not that bad, but I understand that it's really frustrating and it's a really tough process. But overall, like you're not going to be doing multiple jobs at once, even though you're applying to dozens of them. You're not doing dozens of them. You just need one to respond to you, and once you get that, your path is a lot clearer moving forward.
Cool. Thank you all so much for your responses, and I can definitely agree, because that's something that I kind of need to practice right now with myself, is to just be patient and let the process kind of happen on its own, instead of like subjecting myself to like succumbing to like societal pressures. And I mean, I've had like several FaceTimes with my siblings being like, should I do this? But they're like, you'll hate it there. I'm like, oh, you're actually right. But the thing is, Angie would know because she's one of them. But just take your time, and with patience, more opportunities are or tend to pop up that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. Yeah, well, thank you all so much. Moving on to question 3. What are some tips that y'all have when it comes to developing or like cultivating an air quotes authentic professional identity? This is sometimes true for folks who are going into a industry that they don't see a lot of representation of people that have the similar backgrounds or look like them. But yeah, Angie, did you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. I think I'm very lucky in my current role in that I work for a company where what we sell is play and fun. And I also work within a type of team, within a type of industry that we're working to help support other people. Therefore, like, we want to support ourselves first as people before we are employees. And then up on top of that, I work in a team where everyone's a person of color. So I think knowing all of those things, my answer to this question might be slightly different than someone who works on a team that looks different or within an industry that looks different. But for me, in terms of developing and cultivating an authentic professional identity, it's been pretty easy because I feel a level of confidence and comfort. But still, I am a lot younger than everyone else within my team and within my company. And to kind of figure out how I show up in this space, I've really surrounded myself with people who look like me, and I just cling on to them for dear life. Obviously, not everyone that looks like me is a very nice person, but I've found those couple of people that are truly friends and mentors to me who prioritize my development within work, my development as a human being. And I think having those types of mentors is super, super important. I'm just thinking about a conversation I had earlier today. I didn't know what like job family matrices are. And so one of my mentors was like, brilliant. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes going through why you need a promotion. And you're going to take these notes and walk to your manager in a couple of weeks when it's time to have that conversation. So you have all the correct language and you have all of the correct things to point out. And I think having people like that who are on your team to where they'll take time out of their day to make sure you feel supported, and they'll go beyond what you know to ask for to make sure you're set up well is very important. I honestly don't know how I would navigate the professional space if I didn't have mentors like that. And then also just a good note for myself. I'm like, wow, I've grown so much with these mentors. Hopefully one day I can be that person for someone else.
Thank you, Angie. With any Shrija or Amy, y'all have anything to add to that question?
So I think it's a really interesting question. Asking about how to show up like kind of authentically in a professional setting. I think it's important also though to realize that I think showing up authentically means something different for everybody. So some people might feel the need to, and like there's no wrong answer, right? So some people might feel like in order to feel safe and comfortable at work, they need to be able to share any or all parts of their identity to feel like they can connect with their coworkers, their colleagues, to show up authentically. And other people might not feel like it's something that they need to do in order to show up. I think for some, and I think I feel more similarly towards the latter. I feel like sometimes showing up for me doesn't necessarily look like me showing up the way I feel as authentic, with friends or family, right? And I think it's important to think about, and for me that works, right? I don't feel the need to introduce any of my particular identities for a lot of my colleagues because I'm not there to make friends. Like I'm there to do my job, and that's the boundary that I've set for myself because it helps me, right? And for other people, it might not feel natural to do that, and they might need the option to feel safe in sharing those boundaries with other people. So I guess it's just important to reflect on yourself and what kind of needs you have in that regard, right? I think it's just as important as questions like, oh, like, is this job located near me? Is it paying what I needed to pay? I think it's a question just like that one, right? Where it's like, everybody has a different answer. Everybody has a different kind of metric of what that means and what that looks like. I think even for me, even though I don't feel like I necessarily need to share a lot of my identity with my coworkers, like I've been fortunate enough to have some mentors, kind of like what Angie was saying, where I do definitely feel comfortable showing up authentically. And even if those are like respites that are like few and far between, it works for me because I'm able to have somebody who I know, like at the end of the day, if I need to go to somebody to vent about something or ask them like, was this racist, this thing that just happened, like anything from just kind of connecting casually or, actually getting like specific guidance related to my shared identity with them, I think that that's super helpful. But in general, I think it's just important to realize that you have the power to decide how much of yourself you're sharing in terms of your work identity.
Thank you so much. Amy, did you have anything else to add, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think just some tips overall, especially when you might be navigating imposter syndrome, is um, staying true to yourself, staying true to your lived experiences, and acknowledging how those experiences also contribute to how you got to where you are in the moment. I think, for some of us, we might be in fields where the field is predominantly dominated by people with a certain degree. And if you don't have that degree, you might feel like, your expertise is undermined. But just a reminder, like, and I say this all the time with my team, who I lead, is, I am a very firm believer that you don't just learn at school, you learn at home, you learn out on the streets, you learn from friends, you learn from loved ones. And all of those things contribute to your identity. I think for me, my work ethic is something that I attribute to learning from my mom. It's not anything that I learned through the university or through being in school or being in the workforce. That's something that I learned at home and that I carry very easy to me. And so just identifying those different little points and definitely finding a person who you can lean on, a person who you can vent to, relate to. I definitely resonate both with Angie and Trisha, where I may not be a full open book with all of my colleagues, but I have my people who I can go back to and chat with. And I think definitely finding those people that you can do that with is really helpful, because just being able to unload and have someone listen to you helps unload that feeling of uncertainty. I think when things go unsaid, oftentimes it builds up internally, and then that can lead to burnout. That can lead to, you feeling like you just don't have the capacity to be fully present or to do what you were contracted for. And so just finding those spaces to unwind and just simply exist are going to be key to unraveling things like imposter syndrome.
Cool. Thank you all so much for your responses. I think all of those responses were kind of a little segue-ish into question 4. Shreya, did you want to go ahead and start off question 4?
Yeah. Next, let's talk about toxic work cultures. So how would you identify them? And if you've had an experience with one, how were you personally able to identify it? And what identifiers should our listeners look out for? And whoever wants to start can start.
Yeah, I can start. And I'll say that this is a really hard one because likely when it is happening, you're simply choosing to think that that's just the way that things are and not necessarily questioning them. And so I would say, really rely on your gut when it's telling you that something's not right, that your experience is actually what you experience. I think as someone who identifies as a person of color, as a young professional, as a first generation individual, I think I've really had to teach myself to pay attention, pay close attention to microaggressions, because it can be the simplest thing in conversation that is said, but really tapping into the discomfort that it may have made me feel, and then just identifying what is causing it. It can be systems of white supremacy. It can also just be just someone's comment overall. And then if and when you're in a space where you're comfortable, I always like to be direct and let someone know exactly how they made me feel. Of course, when it is a situation where I feel comfortable. If not, then I find someone who can mentor me or guide me on how to navigate the situation.
Thank you so much, Amy. If anyone else would like to go next.
I can answer this also. I'm a big believer in like your gut feeling, whatever that feeling is instinctual to y'all, it probably is true. So if something feels wrong, feels bad, just trust your instinct. And don't gaslight yourself into believing it didn't happen or that it wasn't as big or crazy as it actually was. I think that is super key. And when it comes to what toxic work cultures look like, it can be anything from racism, microaggressions, or even someone putting time on your calendar when you don't like to work. I think all of those are things you can call out, but obviously you call those out in very different ways. For bigger items, I think definitely having that mentor person or having someone in the company that can advocate you and leaning on them for support. And even just those smaller things like, hey, I usually hop on really early to work, which means I hop off earlier. Having a line that you can copy and paste that doesn't feel so emotional, they can send someone being like, hey, this time won't work for me. Let's reschedule to a different time. That's better for my calendar. That's how I usually address it.
Cool. Thank you all so much. Kind of also segueing, but I would think like the key points from those two questions previously is to definitely figure out your comfort level within the space that you're in, but it's also very important to have or try to establish at least like one person or a mentor more specifically that you can always get to regardless of the situation, because they usually have lived through or have similar lived experiences, so they know best to address it or guide you through it. And so kind of moving on to question 5, how can one address certain toxic work cultures, such as structures like white supremacy that are intertwined with like the very foundation of certain like corporate industries? Angie, would you like to start us off with this one again?
Sure. I think when it comes to addressing structures like white supremacy, that isn't on the individual to address. That's a big structural thing that is beyond, like, I pull my bootstraps and I can't do that. That's beyond me. So I think not having the expectations on yourself to fix something that you can't fix or to fit into an environment that does not mesh with how you are. I think recognizing that first. And then secondly, if you're recognizing these structures around you, they're making you uncomfortable, I would say first prioritize your own safety and security. Oftentimes, I notice little things like, oh, because I'm so junior in the company, sometimes when I come into meetings, my voice doesn't hold as much weight. Obviously, that is a structural issue, but I have mentors or other people in the meeting that can advocate for me. So it's like, okay, that feels fine enough for me. Luckily, I've never experienced anything that really pushes my safety and security, so I can't talk to what the next steps are, but I've heard other people also mention take notes of absolutely everything. Once again, trust your gut and lean on those people who actually respect you as a person. And if you don't have that individual, go find HR. They're there to help you.
Cool. Thank you, Angie. Would the rest of the guests like to add anything else?
Yeah, I would add, and I guess it really differs, I think, depending where you're working at. I think, you know, and I just, you're working at a larger company, whereas in my experience, I'm working at a smaller nonprofit. And so I would say, you know, sometimes these smaller nonprofits, they don't have a particular, you know, HR department. You might have a designated colleague to be HR. And so I think, you know, just pick different approaches. I think in my work, the way that I contribute to addressing certain things like this is just making sure that my voice is heard when surveys are sent out in terms of staff satisfaction, in terms of how our work-life balance is going about, just making sure that I am adding comments so that whoever is reviewing it on our operations team, whether it's our executive director or our operations managers, that they are aware of these different issues, and that these things are shared back, and that there are clear action plans on how to address this or just draw attention to it. And so I think it really differs. Every agency is set up differently, but simply just trying to name it and finding those different segues to just draw attention to it, I think is one small angle where I can chip away at these simple structures.
Thank you so much, Amy. Shrija, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, so I think something that someone else said actually at the last conference that we were all part of, at the 3C conference, I think somebody was mentioning that, in certain cases where people are maybe making it hard for you to do what like Angie was saying, which is like prioritizing yourself and your safety and your security and, making sure that you're feeling heard and respected. If there's a way to, speak out about it, like Angie and Amy mentioned, I think it's also important to make sure that you are leaving a paper trail of that being mentioned, right? So if somebody has done something that's like disrespecting you or your boundaries, it's important to make sure that that's recorded somewhere, right? So that if needed, if you need to kind of show someone else that this actually did take place, this actually did happen, like feel free to take whatever steps you need to hold other people accountable. Because ultimately, and I know this sounds kind of cynical, but like you at work, like you are your own number one. Like you have to look out for yourself always. And so don't be shy and don't be afraid to like take steps that you need to take in order to make sure that you're feeling safe and prioritizing your own safety and holding other people around you accountable.
Cool. Thank you all so much. And moving, kind of just shifting gears a bit, moving on to question 6. Shreya, would you like to go ahead with that one?
Yeah, let's talk about work-life balance. So how do you juggle the two, and what methods do you all use to separate the two? Amy, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I can get us started. I think this one is definitely an interesting one, and one that has really been transformed by the pandemic. I think in my instance, I work remotely, I work from home. And so I think for me, work-life balance means integrating that same balance even into my own work life, finding different pockets of time where maybe I can go for a walk, or maybe I make my habit of being at home all the time and work out of a cafe, or I'm at a place where, I feel like I am working, but maybe I am doing something else for my own mental wellness. I think the other thing that I hold really near and dear to me as I'm continuing to do my work is always knowing that work is always going to be there. And I say that in the sense that I'm always like more than happy to adjust my schedule and not necessarily sticking to a 9 to 5 structure and thinking that I need to be online for all of the hour. Like if I need to prioritize my health and go out to an appointment, I have that flexibility to be able to go ahead and do that. And so I think I prioritize work-life balance even throughout my standard work week. And then I think on the weekends, just really reserving those times for wellness, to do things that you really like. When I lived in Santa Cruz, I always found those pockets of time to walk down to the beach during my break or afterwards to see the sunset and things like that. And now I just, find things that I really like and do them outside of work during my after hours or during the weekend. And then I just know that, Monday through Friday, I have certain things that I need to get done, but my schedule is definitely flexible and accommodating to my own life.
Yeah, to add to that, I think it's really important, and I think like a big, like very clear answer to this question is like boundaries, right? So having like very strong boundaries that you have control over is really important, both in the context of like, like Angie touched on earlier, where like if people are trying to add time to your calendar or have meetings with you outside of your working hours, like being like firm and clear that that's not going to happen. And of course, like I think like any good boundary, it's something that you decide the flexibility of, right? So if it's something that makes sense for you to adjust, on a case-by-case basis, then you can. But I think the main thing is feeling empowered to create and stick to different boundaries that you feel would be relevant to you and cater to you and the work that you do, and your lifestyle. I think, like Amy said, like a lot of people, I think, associate working with a typical like 9 to 5 kind of structure, but a lot of offices, obviously, with the past couple of years, have changed a lot, right? That the way that we think about work and the way that we interact with colleagues and how we approach work has changed a lot. I think in that regard, right, like working with people in different time zones is really interesting. And that's a challenge that I've definitely learned about more over the past couple of years, as it's not something that I've done before. And I think that's something that's helped me understand the ways to create certain boundaries related to like working hours, right, like Angie touched on. And I think overall, like that's adjusted a lot of the way that companies in general collaborate and work and approach work and collaboration. And I think I feel like it's important that workers feel empowered to set their own schedule and find jobs that cater to them versus the other way around. You have control over your job position more than you think, right? And even in cases where you're talking to like recruiters or negotiating or whatever it is, part of your perks, part of the compensation that you're receiving is how much of your own time you have. So feeling comfortable and confident in negotiating that is, I think, just as important as something like negotiating something like pay.
Yeah, I think adding on to that point, in terms of what we require within our role, what we require from the places where we work, I believe that work-life balance structurally is something that we have to require from our leadership at work. It's not something that we can go and implement. If you're in a role where true work-life balance just is not achievable because of the structure, I guess the best thing to do is to leave. But obviously there's other things we can implement for ourselves, set those boundaries so that you can find as much work-life balance for yourself. And I think ways that I've done that is just being very clear in my communication with my team. And the work that I do, sometimes depending on what disaster is happening around the world, we're in charge of supporting a corporate response to those things. So like the war in Ukraine or even wildfire season in California. And when you're doing so much research every single day, waking up, looking at the news, what's happening, it can get really, really draining on the soul. It can make you really sad. And so what I found helpful for me is to just prioritize time, maybe even leave work halfway through the day to just mindlessly scroll on TikTok or to watch some beauty gurus on YouTube, find whatever that escape is for you and to put aside a good amount of chunk so that the next day when you come back, you are a little bit more refreshed. So whatever that is for you, whether it be an actual boundary you set with people or an expectation that you set for yourself and communicate out, I think both are equally as important.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I want to add to. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I just want to add to that. What Angie said really resonated with me. I think it's important to, I think like, especially like in my experience working with like women of color or like AAPI individuals, like facing specific instances of like model minority myth and different kind of toxic like stereotypes. I think it's easy to fall into the idea that like anything except for work is not productive. And if you're doing anything outside of like labor, like doing something where you're relating to your job, you're interacting with your job in some way, if you're doing anything besides that, you're wasting time. That's absolutely not true. Like that's a capitalist lie. And it's important that people, again, like Angie was saying, like feel empowered to take their own time back. And like, and also for you as a person, like it's important that you feel empowered to rest because that is productive, because you're allowing yourself the time to like recover, like Angie was saying, and escape if you need to, right? I think it's important to challenge the idea that anything except for work is not productive. That's absolutely not true. And obviously it's easier said than done to believe that, resting is a productive thing. But hopefully I think with our generation, younger generations, like I think there's definitely a very clear shift in perceptions around work and productivity and what counts as being productive. So I hope that kind of sentiment carries on and people feel empowered to rest as, an act of self-preservation, as an act of of, solidarity with others too.
Thank you all so much for your responses, and that definitely like hits home to what you mentioned earlier, Shrija, with how you are your number one. Especially how a lot of students leaving school for the past, I don't know, like decade and a half, you've been used to the same like schedule, like mixing work and rest a lot of the time. And once going into the workforce, it takes some time to definitely adjust that mindset, but you definitely put yourself first, and by resting and taking time for yourself, your employers will benefit from it because they're getting you at like 110%. So yeah. And okay, moving on to our last question. Like many of us, we have developed our friendships through school. And oh shoot, hold on. Let me restart that. Okay. Like many of, wait, let me do a little time. Okay. Like many of us, we have developed our friendships through school, as that has been the time that we've socialized outside of home. How can you separate your professional and personal relationships, especially how are you able to cultivate these friendships while still maintaining that professional relationship? We kind of touched upon some of this in the previous questions, but if there's anything else that y'all have like with lived experiences or anything you would like to add, go ahead, and whoever wants to start can start us off.
I can start for this one. I think in terms of like friendships at work, I'm lucky in that the company I work at right now is also the company I interned at during college. And because it's such a big company, there were big internship classes where all of the interns were bachelor students or like master students, but all around the same age generally. And so now coming into this company full time, I've maintained and kept a lot of those relationships, and those relationships lean more friendship for me in the professional setting because they don't work in the same team as me. Some of them are familiar with this company, but they've moved on to another company, and that just breaks the connection a little bit and makes it more fun and friendshipy. And I think thinking about really, really good mentors at work, I see them more as mentors than I do friends, but those mentors are also within the same company or were previously at the company, but have now either jumped to a different company or work in a completely different team than me. So when I talk about general ideas or general things that are happening at work, they understand it completely, but they're not so tied in themselves. And I think that space is kind of the boundary I have in order to maintain these really great relationships.
I'm just going to add one more. Sorry, Yu Yao. But is there anything else that y'all think we've missed in our questioning today that you believe the upcoming like generations of folks entering into the workforce should know? It's a pretty big question. So
I think something that I want to emphasize to people, like younger people especially, who maybe haven't had experience like working in whatever field they're interested in pursuing, I think that it's important to remember that, first of all, I think a lot of times we frame networking as this kind of thing that's like somebody better, bigger, more strong, more important than you is offering you like an ounce of their time, be grateful, right? I think that can be the really intimidating aspect of networking. I think it's important though to kind of challenge that idea and think about networking as like a relationship building. It's not so much something that is like you give, I take, or vice versa. It's important to frame it as like community building, because it is, right? And I think like listening to Angie and Amy even talk about different experiences they've had with mentors, like clearly it goes beyond just like a kind of transactional thing. And also like it is intimidating to consider networking in that way. But I think it's important to remember that even, making friends in your own major, that's networking, right? Like having, family members that you can call and talk about work with or talk about career with, right? Like career talks with, like that's networking too. Like, and of course, like it doesn't feel like it when you're younger and like in a more junior role, but like that's how connections are made. And like 20 years down the line, 10 years down the line, like maybe somebody who you worked with on your first job ever has like a position that they know about on their company. And like, it just kind of goes and it grows onwards, right? So it's not something that's necessarily, I think, the way that it's made out to be, where it's somebody bigger and better helping somebody smaller like get their wings. It's not necessarily that way. Of course, it's really important to be thankful to and grateful for all of the the people who have come before you to help you out and everything like that. I don't think anyone is self-made, but it's important also to recognize that like just you talking to your friends and working on homework together is networking. Like we don't have to frame it as such a huge, scary monster. It's something much more casual as well.
Sure, I can add something. I think the biggest realization I've had in my first year in the big world is that no one really knows what they're doing, and there is no correct answer to anything at all. So I think peeling that back and peeling that pressure back has been really helpful for me. I've seen people who I admire, look up to, slip up and mess up in the same ways that I've slipped up and messed up. But I always give them grace. So I'm trying to practice giving myself more grace with every single step. Yeah, there's no one right answer. If you're working down one path doesn't seem fun, go find a different path that sounds more fun, or another opportunity that looks more exciting, whatever you define exciting as.
Thank you, Angie. Amy?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add is I really appreciate both Angie and Teresa for having those points, and adding on to what Angie said, like no one knows it all, like and we're all learning as we go. So having that grace and compassion, and I think just it's okay to name that you don't know something. There are definitely people who are out there who are willing to teach you something and show you by example. So it's okay to simply name and say, I'm not a content expert here, or I would appreciate some guidance on this. I think, I've met so many people who are maybe in higher positions, in leadership positions, and saying, I don't have the answer right now, but let's help create an answer. And I think, one of the reflections I often have is like, we're all working for a solution, and oftentimes we're building the solution. We're often building the ship as we're sailing it. And so keep that saying just like near and dear, and just remember, I think like, if there wasn't a solution to be found, then we wouldn't have our job. I guess in my case, working in public health, like we're working to improve health systems. And so if there wasn't anything to be improved, then we wouldn't have jobs. And so we only know what we know, and the rest is going to be history. We're going to learn that and build that as we go.
Cool. Thank you all so much for your responses. Alrighty. So Angie, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one last thing real quick to what I was saying earlier. Just wanted to add that changing your environment doesn't have to be a complete 180. Changing your environment can be something super, super small. Just thinking about an example, the work I'm doing right now in my job has nothing to do with the JD I was hired for, but in a good way, because as I was going through week by week, month by month, I realized what was really rewarding to me and what just was not cutting it, completely draining me. And so I communicated with my team and communicated with my manager, like this crunching data, reporting stuff, not it. I can't do it. But looking at philanthropic grants, ooh, that's cool. And so I was able to transition some of my focus that way. So I think even throughout the week to week, throughout the month to month, figuring out what sounds fun and creating opportunities to move more closely with that and align yourself more closely with that in itself is major.
Cool. Thank you so much. Any other additions? If not, I can go ahead and wrap us up. Alrighty. As we come to an end to the end of our conversation, I want to extend another thank you to Angie, Amy, and Shrija, and also our amazing co-host Shreya for joining us today, as well as a thank you to everyone else that has come together, all the folks at Career Success, everyone at the ERC. Yu Yao, shouts out to you again for helping us out. And we really hope that this conversation that we had today aids current and future generations of exiting UCSC students, or just any students that are nervous about the next step into joining the workforce. And if you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead, like and subscribe. Very YouTubey with my response, but and also if we have anything that we would like to plug, if you would like to see more information, we will definitely include it in the description down below. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.